Over the past few weeks, I've spoken about the UAE-Israel normalization deal. I've also opined on the impact that such a deal would have on Palestinian aspirations for self-determination. I've also spoken about the horrendous blast that took place at the port of Beirut in Lebanon and the attempts to form a new government that actually would address the dire needs of most Lebanese citizens. But today I'm going to speak about something else in this episode of YouTube. I'm going to talk about Syria and about a delegation, a huge delegation, an impressive delegation, headed by that remarkable implementing tool of Russian Federation foreign policy, Sergei Lavrov, to Syria. So, welcome to Intuitive Reactions, the MENA and Gulf regions. And as I said, this is a new episode, it's number 15. Now, where do I start? This is the first time since 2012, so almost 8 years now, that Sergei Lavrov is going to Damascus. Remember, he wasn't in the delegation with President Vladimir Putin when the latter went to Syria as well. So the first time he's going there in order to address, in my opinion, three key points, which are manifested by the fact that this delegation has representatives, negotiators, advisors for economic, military, and political issues. But let me also open a bracket here. In addition to Syria, I think a last-minute addendum was Cyprus. Lavrov is going to visit Nicosia and meet with the Cypriot officials there in the recognized part of the island in order to discuss the conflict that has been brewing in the Eastern Mediterranean. A conflict that, at least on paper or from our television screens, we can even see the impact. A conflict that's been brewing between, on the one side, Greece, France, Cyprus, even I would add Egypt and the UAE. And on the other hand, we have Turkey and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, or the TRNC, which is only recognized internationally by Turkey and not by the United Nations. And this conflict has had many roots to it. One of them is about oil and oil exploration. It's about delimitation. It's about the territorial waters and the continental shelf. It's about how much space does each of those countries, mainly Greece and Turkey, have in the Mediterranean, because that would impact everything from right of passage to oil. And therefore, I think that Lavrov is going to go and speak to the Cypriot officials as a friend, because let's not also forget that the Russian Federation is a friend of both Greece and Cyprus, but it is also a friend, perhaps not so much, but still a friend of Turkey. And Russia and Turkey have been cooperating, at the very least, in Syria itself and in Libya. So let's focus on those three prongs. You have the political, and you have the economic, and I suppose you have the military. The political is the most important, in my opinion, and I think we have to remember when we talk about the political discussions that will be had in Damascus, that Syria is going toward presidential elections in 2021. Who's going to run in those elections? Is it going to be Bashar al-Assad again on his own and he gets 99.99% of the votes? Or if we want to show how democratic Syria is, he probably would arrange that only 81% of Syrians vote for him. Or is it going to be other candidates as well who would be fielded, even though their chance of success is minimal, still a facade, a veneer of democracy? Would there be other people? In fact, some social media reports have been going on raging for months about Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, being on his last legs in Damascus, being on his way out, preparing his suitcase in order to go, I don't know where. But I would take all those reports at the moment with a pinch of salt, because all these reports, including the family feuds between cousins, between Bashar al-Assad and Rami Makhlouf, Bashar's wife, etc., all this has been going on and raging for quite a bit. And in fact, we touched upon that in a previous intuitive reactions that I had with the wonderful Ziad Majid, who was in Paris. So, presidential elections. Don't forget, Lavrov has also been speaking to the UN Special Representative Geir Pedersen. He's also spoken, interestingly enough, to Muad al-Khatib, who is, in my opinion, one of the serious figures of the Syrian opposition at the moment. So I think that there will be those discussions in order to chart out, or at least to explore the way forward for Syria. And what the way forward means for Syria, I honestly cannot tell you at the moment, because a lot of the way forward for Syria, just as in other countries, mind you, in the MENA region and elsewhere, means a change of regime, a change of institutions, a strengthening of those institutions and of civil and civic organizations. That's a huge ask. So at the moment, what it means in terms of the political future of Syria, well, maybe those negotiations will give us some inkling, not only in terms of where Syria is today and where it might be tomorrow in 2021 under Bashar al-Assad's leadership or under some other form of leadership, but it would also show, I think, as to where Russia is heading in Syria, because there have been tensions between Syria and Russia on a number of issues, and it would be, for me at least, quite telling the direction that those discussions take, or at least the bits that I and many of us will be privy about. Then, of course, there is the other side of it, and that is somehow the military side also, which is what happens in Syria east of the Euphrates. Why do I say east of the Euphrates? Because that is where there are the Kurdish factions, and where there is the US presence, a small presence, but one nonetheless, which incidentally controls a lot of the oil in Syria. So are we talking about that region becoming basically devolved, autonomous? How devolved, how autonomous could or would it become? Or would Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian regime insist that it goes totally under the control of the central government in Damascus? I think this is also something that will be one of the outcomes of the discussions to be had with Lavrov in Syria. And I think that when we talk about the political and the sort of military or geostrategic perspectives of Syria, it also points out to something that a lot of us are aware of, and that is the regression the retrenchment of the American influence in that neck of the woods, and how that regression or that retrenchment or that withdrawal, and some of it was very intentional withdrawal by President Donald J. Trump, because he has different understanding of what the presidency and the role of the United States is in the world. That retrenchment has created a hole, and lo and behold, the Russian Federation has very dexterously and very ably filled some of that hole, Syria being one example, Libya being another, and it is also trying to extend its endeavors across other parts of the region as well. So whatever the reasons behind it, those two sets of discussions would be very interesting. And of course, the third discussion would be on the issue of the economics of Syria. And why do I say the economics of Syria? Because let us admit it, that Russia has been pumping in lots and lots of money into Syria. And what has it got in return? Okay, it's got a presence, a strong presence in the Middle East region, in the Levant. It also has a presence in the warm waters of the Mediterranean. That is true. But what else? What happens next? Because take Tartus, for instance. The Russians are managing it now. They're basically paying for it. But there are no goods coming in, no goods going out. No people are coming in, no people are going out. What are the future prospects economically? What does Russia get in return? How does Russia get repaid for some of its expenditure in Syria? I think this is also going to be one of the items that will be on the list, on the agenda for the two delegations. So that's basically it. A stop in Cyprus, in Nicosia, to discuss the East Mediterranean, and then Syria, where the delegation will address those three prongs, those 3 points, and whatever we will get to know about it or not, I don't know at the moment. And in a sense, the wisdom would have probably said, Harry, wait until after the meeting is over, after they come and go, then there'll be more leakages, there'll be more knowledge about what happened, and this podcast would have a more knowledgeable, learned aspect to it. But that wouldn't be intuitive, would it? Intuitive means something guttural, something that I feel is going to happen, and I wanted to take a risk and say, okay, this is what I think the discussions of this impressive delegation headed by, as I said at the start of this episode, the remarkable implementing tool of Russian foreign policy. What will it yield and what will it give to Russia? How much will Bashar al-Assad bend backward? How much of his wings will be clipped, if any, for that? And how much will Russia get out of it? And how much would the international community, particularly the Americans and the Iranians and the Turks, agree to a Russian almost hegemony of Syria? All that is in the future, perhaps for another episode later on next week. But in the meantime, have a good week.